Hello and welcome to the Joe's Art History Podcast, a podcast which celebrates all things art historical every single day. It's episode 25. Oh my goodness, 25 weeks of podcast enjoyment. I really hope you guys have been enjoying yourself. If you're new here, you are very welcome. Lovely to have you. If you're a previous listener, it's also lovely to have you back. And yeah, there's plenty of episodes to re-listen to and plenty more to come, so do stick around for that. As it's episode 25, I thought I would shake it up a little bit and do something different this week. So a few weeks ago, I sat down with Nico Paws, who has been a continuous contributor to the podcast. You might remember she was my guest on the very first podcast where we spoke about Keith Haring. She also came back to speak about famous art cameos in movies, which, FYI, stick around for part 2 of that coming very, very soon. And she also gave us a brilliant episode on Art Nouveau, and we got a lot of lovely feedback about that episode, so thank you so much. So it felt only fair to invite Nicole back again onto the podcast, and we'd sit down and just have a chat about how the two of us found our way into the art world and the creative industry. Because if there's something that has been a continuous theme, air quotes here, is that no two stories are exactly the same of how people found their way to studying a creative subject and how they found their first job and how they came to university or didn't go to university in some cases. And I just always think it's great to get another view on things, and particularly at a time where by the time this is released, people thinking about universities, finishing university, finishing either their first year, finishing completely, or even starting their university journey. When this is published, it's always just good to think about and hear other people's stories of how they are where they are. Anyway, it's very, very different. Nicole and I sit down and ask each other 5 different questions. And it was a really great chat, actually. A really lovely chat. And we had a lot of fun with this. And I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much. So this is a little bit different from what we normally do, obviously, because it's art history content and I have a guest on that's talking about either an artist or a movement or a building, a designer, a jeweler, something within the context of art history. But I also think it's really important that, particularly when I was kind of going through my journey, I didn't really know anybody what to turn to, or who to turn to rather, and how people kind of get where they are at the moment. And I always think that's quite an interesting story, because everybody comes to the art world differently, or the creative industries differently. And I think, we grew up in the same house. Yeah. We're quite creative people. Yeah. And we both love art, but in very, very different ends of the scale. Yeah, we're both different spectrums of art. Totally. So I think the first question is, for you personally, Nicole, when you think back, what is your earliest experience or memory of art and it having an impact on you?
I think I'm probably the story that a lot of people who partake in the art industry, as in we are the creators, it was always something that I always did. I loved drawing. I always remember when we made that little magazine and I drew loads of Milans. So I laugh.
Is this when we used to do that little shop?
The little tuck shop, and we ripped people off. And we stole tons of Bob's printer paper. Probably made a lot of money. Yeah. We thought we were geniuses. But we actually probably...
Right, so for a bit of context, so Nicole and I are obviously sisters, and there's actually 3 of us, and we're all very different. Lisa, who's our eldest sister, she's not very sort of interested in art.
She's academic.
She's very academic.
Lisa was the academic one, and I think that tends to be the oldest sibling kind of thing, statistically. And then the middle child has to be kind of academic, and then the youngest, me, gets away with anything, so then I can just do what I want. So I was like, art school, I'm gonna draw cats all day. So yeah, I think that's kind of the dynamic of our sisterhood.
Yeah, but what we used to do is we ran a tuck shop in the estate that we live near. So we used to have an old pram, and we would fill it with like old toys and print off from our Disney print studio loads of paper, and Nicole would draw, and then we had a magazine that we put. I remember it was like crosswords and stuff like that in it as well.
By the way, what a hustle for children!
I was gonna say
that's why I laughed, because as soon as it popped in my head. But I remember we got a Disney magazine, and in the Disney magazine it showed you how to draw Milan and like the kicking pose from Man of You.
Yes,
and I would draw all the time because I just loved, like, I was always inspired by like animation, children's stories. I would copy what I'd seen. Obviously not exact, but I just remember drawing this Milan over and over again, and I just vividly remember it being in this, it was like the front cover. I just remember it being on the front cover and me being like, oh, this is it.
I've made it.
5 years old, but oh, probably a bit older, but yeah, that's like my first kind of memory of, I guess, wanting to sell art. Was copying Disney and drawing Milan.
Oh, how interesting. So for me, I think the first time I remember being bowled over, so I'm completely different. So my background is art history, and I always loved history. And I think the first time I remember being in a museum I was, oh my goodness, I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I went on a school trip to the Borough Collection in Glasgow. And the Borough Collection, for people that don't know, is this incredible collection by this gentleman called William Burroughs. And he was a philanthropist, and he would travel all over the world, and he was a great collector of stuff. And he just collected everything from like Chinese porcelain to impressionist paintings to medieval suits of armour. Just an incredible array and eclectic taste in things. And he built up this incredible collection, and he left the collection to the city of Glasgow. And on his death, left the collection, but there was very strict terms in how he wanted the collection to be viewed, and he also left money for a museum to be built to house the collection. But there was conditions within his will on how he wanted the collection to be shown, and it had to be so many miles outside the city centre, because at that time, you know, Glasgow was a huge big shipping port. There was a lot of factories, very industrial, and he, obviously being very aware of conservation, wanted it to be somewhere where those kind of things wouldn't affect the collection, and also encourage people to come out and have essentially what would be a day in the country and come and view the collection. So the Borough Collection is now in a place called Pollock Country Park, which is in the south of Glasgow, which essentially wasn't at the time. He sort of lived there. Well, I don't actually know, he didn't live there. That's a lie. So anyway, that's not important. So they didn't have enough land, and it wasn't until like the 1960s that another family called the Sterling Maxwells left a house called Pollock House to the National Trust of Scotland. And within them leaving their house and the park, there was enough land, and it met all the conditions within this will that they could then build the Borough Collection.
So it wasn't displayed until that was put in place?
Yeah, essentially. So that came up, I think that finished in sort of late 70s, 80s. But it's been closed several times because they kind of threw it up, and there was loads of problems with the roof. And it was supposed to reopen in 2020 after a huge 5-year essentially taking it down and rebuilding it. Anyway, that's a huge
That's another story.
That's another story, which I've completely gone off tangent. But I went there on my primary 7. So you're about 11.
11.
In your primary 7.
Yeah, 10, 11.
And so it's the year before you go to high school in Scotland anyway. And I walked into the collection and I was like, wow, this is amazing, because it had all these stuffed animals and all these paintings, all these vases. And then I walked into a room that was a medieval banquet hall, which he had taken down panel by panel and then was rebuilt in the house, including this big dining table. And I just felt like I'd stepped into some sort of medieval castle. It was just amazing. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And the whole time I was there, I just loved it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until later in life that I knew that you could do it as a job. It didn't really cross my mind. I was one of these people, my whole way through school, I had no idea what I wanted to do.
I was the exact same. I just drew doodles on the side. I don't say doodles, but the way I draw, my style, I very much just didn't think it was legitimate. And so I just very much pursued realism and portraiture and still life and stuff in high school and stuff like that.
So when did you realise then that you wanted to kind of move into the creative industry?
I think for me, my journey was a bit different. So I've obviously done art throughout all of high school. It was like my priority. I did standard grade, I did higher, and then advanced higher. So advanced higher is essentially like first year of college, I think. It's like a HNC or HNC, and it was fine art. But at the same time, like I really liked it, but I wasn't. Not that I wasn't 100% into it. I was portraiture was like my priority and stuff, and I did really well. And then when it came to applying for university, I still wasn't sure if I wanted to go down that route. Because I think at the time I just wanted to work, I just wanted money. So, but mum, and I mean, God bless her, she's very much the priority of, like, in Scotland you get free education, which we are very lucky for. So mum was saying, if it's free, go for it, and even just apply for college. So I did 1 year in college, and I just hated it. And I just didn't try, I didn't bother. I'd hated how, not the way that fine art was presented to us. It was very much that the only way to make it is if you offend people. So they would show us a lot of like really risky artists, you know, things like Damien Hirst. There was an artist, I can't remember his name. It was things like he would pour the blood from the bullfights over himself. It was like very much exhibiting pieces.
Okay.
I can't remember his name. I did that, and that to me, that was like, I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to offend people. And like it's like my iconic line, because he was like, he just hated what I did, and he was like, your stuff's too cute. You can't just do cute stuff. And then I was like, all I want to do is draw cats and teacups. And every time I've applied for something, I've always started with that line, because it is legitimately what I've always wanted to do. So I worked for maybe 7 years. So I did my first year at college, and then I left, and then I just worked, and I just focused on making money. And then I got a job with a fashion company called Killstar, which is an alternative fashion brand. And I loved what they did, like the idea of selling apparel and, you know, like prints and stuff like that. I just loved it. And then one day my boss threw out the word that they were working with an illustrator, and I was just like, a what? And then he was like, an illustrator, like someone that just draws. And then I was like, what, like a painter? And he was like, no, it's a completely different thing. So then I researched it, and then I just was like, oh my God, this is what I've always loved. I've always loved illustration. So applied for that, went to college for 2 years, and then I went to uni, went to DJCAD, Duncan Jordison College of Art and Design, which is in Dundee, and I was a direct entry in a second year. And then I have just graduated last year, so I graduated during the pandemic. That's an adventure, that's probably a different podcast, but graduated last year, so I'm a fresh graduate, fresh and clean out in the world. But yeah, I for me, like, I don't think I would have been able to do it any other way. I'm really glad I worked first, then pursued education. I also think it shows that there is no age limit to education.
No, and I would completely agree with you. Like, I think there's always this thing where, particularly for me, so my experience was very different to yours. I was very much told at school, if I didn't go to university, that was kind of it, really, for my life. So I was just so terrified that if I didn't get into university straight away, I just wouldn't be able to do anything with myself. But I think, like you said, and there's another artist that I've interviewed called Kerry Curl, and she actually went to university at the age of 37. And she starts off the podcast by saying, I went to university quite late, and then she stops herself and she went, no, we need to sort of destigmatise this whole thing around you need to go to university when you're a teenager. Because actually, looking back on what I did, I actually think it might have actually been the best thing for me to take maybe a year or two out and sort of figure out who I was as a person first, and maybe experience life a little bit. I mean, because we're from a very, very small town.
I think though, your education journey was completely different.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You were the standard, but then you did take that year out and worked, and I do think that worked to your advantage. But please, Jo, what is your, I guess, educational and experience into the world of art history?
Well, for me, how I initially decided that I wanted to pursue art history at university was I literally had no idea. And I was in my final year at high school. So you can stay in high school in Scotland till you're 18, which is fairly standard, I think, in the UK. You're about 17, 18, and then you go to university. Yeah. And I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew I really liked art, and I was doing it at Advanced Higher. And at our school anyway, we were given quite a big room, and you could set up a studio space within this one classroom. So you could have a still life, for example, a huge big still life, and continue to work through it, and you build a portfolio around whatever you've decided to do. Anyway, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was kind of the only person in my friendship group that didn't know, and that's really terrifying at any age, but particularly when you're 18 and everyone knows what university they're going to apply for. And I'm not somebody that's naturally very academic. I have to really study.
I am honestly so shocked. I thought you knew
instantly. No, I didn't know. No, I had no idea. So the story is, I was actually late to an open day. So if you've ever gone to university, you'll know that they run these things called open days. And you go along and you sort of speak to the lecturers and you sort of get a taste of what's going on. So I went to the University of Glasgow. So I went to that open day because I wanted to go there. It's quite a difficult school to get into, and I didn't actually think I was good enough to get into it. So when I went to the open day, I was actually late getting there. I had a driving lesson in the morning because where we live, it's kind of like the second you turn 17 and you can get a provisional license, you kind of just run at it because you just, the freedom that it gives you in this tiny little town. So when, or I felt like that anyway.
I know, once again, opposite. I waited till I was older.
Yeah. I was like, get me out of here.
And I'm like, slow and steady.
Anyways, I went to this open day. I was late and I called my friends and I was like, where are you? And they were like, oh, we're done. We're in the union. Like, come and have a couple of pints. And I was like, I've like travelled an hour to get here. I'll have a quick look round and then I'll come meet you. And it's actually the best thing that's ever happened to me. Mm. And I started walking around the stalls on my own. And because I was on my own, I kind of had to speak to people and make myself talk to people. So I was quite, at the time I was thinking, maybe I want to do history. Went to the history stand and the guy couldn't have been ruder to me. He was just so dismissive and so uninterested. And I just thought, well, I don't want to study in a department that speaks to me like that. And I'm not even a student yet. Like, what are you going to, that's shocking.
Yeah.
And I turned around and I saw this woman sitting at a stand that said art history. And I was like, what on earth is that? So I went over to her and I started talking to her, and that was it. She completely sold it to me. And I was like, what do you do with art history? And she was like, oh, well, so you study the history behind paintings and the history of people, these artists, movements, why they're culturally important. It's a really interesting subject. It interlinks literacy and philosophy, religious studies. Everything really is centred around art history. It's really important. And I was like, what kind of jobs can you do with that? And then she sort of rhymed off all these different things out with the sort of usual curator, archivist, conservation worker. And she just completely sold it to me. So I was like, oh my God, this is it. And it was kind of like a lightning bolt moment. And that's when I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And that's kind of how I chose what I wanted to do. But it was, I'm really glad that I held off. And I'd kind of like made the decision that if I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do, I would probably just go to uni and do history. But I'm really, really glad I didn't actually, because I would have been miserable.
Yeah. But you also then went and did a master's as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so I did 4 years at Glasgow University where I studied art history. And then I went to London and went to Kingston University, and I did a year's master's doing art market appraisal professional practice, which is essentially as art business. And the reason I went there is kind of something very similar. I went to an open day at Christie's Education. So there's 3 very big auction houses. There's hundreds of auction houses, of course, all over the world and in the UK. But the 3 big ones are, well, there's 4 big ones actually. So there's Christie's, Bonhams, Phillips and Sotheby's. And Christie's and Sotheby's also run education centres and so schools, and they offer master's degrees or undergraduate degrees in sort of art market or art business studies. And I thought, when I got the prospectus, I was like, well, these are the best places to go for these sorts of things. And essentially when I was reading the sort of university prospectus or the book, like very subtly throughout it, they were kind of like, you will definitely get a job if you go here.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I've been told it's notoriously difficult to get a job in the art world, so if I need to pay, at this point it was something like £28,000 for a year's study, And I went to the open day, and I went with my friend Jennifer, who we went down to London for the weekend, did the open day. It was actually like an evening reception. And when we were in the common room, someone on the staff made a beeline for me and said to me, "Oh, I suppose you'll be looking for a scholarship to study here." And I was like, "Oh, great, I even look poor." And that's something that I actually really studied. As honestly, it's something I really struggled with when I went to Glasgow University, because it's very well to do. Glasgow University, it's kind of like St Andrews, and that everyone is
designer and bougie.
Oh my goodness! Like, there was girls in my class that were pulling up in their convertible cars and their Prada handbags outside lecture theatres, and it's really intimidating, particularly when you're 18, 19, 20, and all you do is constantly compare. You're a woman, and all you do is constantly compare yourself to these people. Very interestingly though, fun fact, there was a girl in our school, there was a girl in my department who on graduation day, so she was a bit of a sort of kiss ass, shall we say, to the lecturers, and they absolutely adored her. I'm not going to name her. And
but you know if you're listening.
you know who you are. And she was quite intimidating, really intimidating. And but then again, when I think of it, maybe I was just intimidated by her because she was just very sure of herself.
I think, as I know this is like nothing to do with education, but especially that era when you're young, you're full of hormones. Because even I was the same, I just compared myself all the time, and someone who was confident was automatically just nasty and scary. But I think it's just because you're not confident in yourself.
Well, we never really spoke, that's the thing, and she didn't really look the road I was on, so, which was fine, that didn't bother me. And on the day we graduated, she was going around saying to everybody that she got a first and that she was really happy with it, yada yada yada. And a couple of years later, I found her on, actually no, it was only a couple of years ago, I randomly came across her on LinkedIn, and so I clicked on her profile and she got a 2-1.
But that's it. There's nothing wrong with 2-1, folks. That's what I got.
That's what I got as well. I got a 2-1. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. And she was also doing exactly the same job I was, but in a different gallery. And I was like, my God. So that's something I would maybe say, don't listen to all the hot air that's around you. Just kind of concentrate on yourself, really. So I think the next question then, sort of naturally, after both leaving university, particularly at different times, and particularly for you, Nicole, who's graduated during a pandemic, and I really think
all that is graduates of 2020 and 2021, we deserve all the jobs.
All the even
fire everyone who's been there for years, give them to us. We can work through a pandemic. We are invincible.
I just think you've been dealt such a tough hand, and I don't know how I would have dealt with that. But coming out of university, what have you found the hardest?
Me personally, so I was very fortunate. During my last year at uni, I'd applied for a free placement with a women's collective called Wild and Kind. So I got one of the tables. So it's basically studio space and you can print there and stuff. So it meant that I would have somewhere to go to kind of keep on being creative. Because I knew that was automatically, I know what I'm like. As soon as like at Christmas or the summer when I'd get home from uni, I just wouldn't work. Because I'd be like, I want to sleep, I'm so tired. And it's the same, I knew I'd be exhausted. But obviously at the time, I didn't know a pandemic was going to hit. So what I thought would happen was I'd be partying and celebrating with my friends that we'd graduated. Because the way that DGCAD works in your 4th year, and a lot of art schools are the same, is you have your degree show. So that's where your friends and your family come and you host an exhibit and you show your portfolio and you're like, look at all the things I made. And also professionals would come. So you would send out like prospectus to people, to artists and companies and stuff that maybe you would want to come and see your work to possibly hustle, get a job, what's it called? Collaborate? No. So you present yourself basically, you show off all your work, your portfolio, and then afterwards, so that would have took place maybe May, June, do you remember when it was meant to be?
It should have, oh God, I think it was May.
Yeah, so it was meant to be May. And then in June, I'd have graduated, had the ceremony, cap and all. And then you go to London to a thing called New Blood, which is another kind of hosting ceremony where once again you present yourself, but this time it's like an industry run event. It's like the biggest thing to kind of take part in if you really want to kind of get your name in the creative industry, especially with like illustration.
And who shows it at New Blood, sorry?
So what happens with New Blood is you're given a brief. So you have a brief at the beginning of the year. We had two, so we could also work with YCN, but you could present at New Blood. So it was things like it was HSBC. Spotify had one, Audible had one, Lego had one, Teen Vogue had one. So different companies give briefs, and then you have to work and respond to the brief, basically.
So I think that's really interesting, though, that you have these sort of huge, big ticket names, because Disney's also there, are they not? There's
Disney's
loads.
doing this year, because I obviously wanted to check it out and then be jealous because you could work with Disney this year. And I did not work with it.
I think it's really interesting that there's even those sorts of things available. But also I think it's really important to emphasise that companies like Vogue and Spotify
are looking for creative designers, who are looking for illustrators and graphic designers. To all my illustration peeps, please don't be intimidated by everyone looking for graphics. The fact is we can also do graphics. Please hire me. No, so I think it's such a nice thing that the universities include that because they know what it's like. My only grievance, I guess, I would say is that it all has to take place in London. So
it makes sense that it's in London because London has that creative hub, and it's also where the headquarters of a lot of these huge big companies go. It's kind of like in America, a lot of the creative things kind of happen in LA or in Chicago or in New York.
But it's a lot of like things that I listen to, and I guess a lot of people within my side of it, we hate it because we don't want to have to up and go to London because it's like just the way London is. So people obviously all need to go to London, but that's not happened because of the pandemic. So obviously my original issues maybe are out the window now. So originally my issues were, I'd need to go to London and I might have to move to London, but even though I don't think that would have been possible because I have a mortgage here, I have a life here, and I really just wanted to freelance. So one thing I'll praise DGCAD for is they have a business module. So if you're in fourth year, any of the creative practices, you'll know this, but if you don't, I'll explain. So you obviously pick the modules that you want to do. So illustration is the main one, and then you pick two different ones that in your third year, and then so the first one for me was mythology, so I have mythology studies, and then the second one was business. So within the business one, you have to write a business plan or a dissertation with like theoretical business that you want to do. So mine's was Nico Paws. I just wrote my entire dissertation on Nico Paws. So I felt confident in the business aspect, but what I didn't really feel confident with was the freelancing aspect, was how I was going to present myself now, because the pandemic took that opportunity away. Was everyone is now online, so it's now just this wave of all these people looking for jobs. So it was things like Dots, LinkedIn. So New Blood didn't happen, but they put on this online event called On Dots, and it was really nice. And I think 3 people in my class won things and were like spoke about, which is amazing, such a good opportunity. But it became a wave. So my issue, and I think this will be everyone's issue, even if this wasn't a normal thing, was what now, what next? Because you don't kind of have the comfort of uni or like a lecturer to kind of tell you you're okay. You have to learn to become comfortable in your own skin, and I guess it's that way of kind of challenging imposter syndrome. So if anyone's not heard of that, it's just you kind of don't think you're worthy or what you are right for what you're doing. And that's really common within designers. But I think you just have to ignore those kind of mini voices, keep doing what you're doing, and the opportunities will present yourself. So I was saying back ago that I'd applied for a space with Wild and Kind. Well, now I'm one of their freelance resale printers, and that's 100% what's kept me being creative, because I get to speak to so many different creative people and work with them. But yeah, that's obviously as a recent graduate. But for you, what was your kind of...
My fears of leaving university, or what I found difficult after university. There was a lot of things. So I was really burnt out at the end of uni.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to take a little break. In the run up to my final exams, I thought, right, okay, I'm going to take some time out after university and do something, but I had no clue what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So there is one sort of tip that I would give you, and something that I tried my whole way through university was to volunteer and intern places within the industry, because I didn't want to get to fourth year and sort of be faced with this big impending, what on earth I want to do. So I knew I wanted to work in an auction house. Although I never had any sort of first-hand experience working in an auction house, that's what I thought I wanted to do. And because I tried archive work and museum work and a little bit of conservation, just through different internships that I found while I was at university. But I think what I found the most difficult was just not really knowing, although I know I wanted a break, I didn't really know what my next steps were.
Yeah.
But also, we had absolutely no support in sort of careers and or where to look for art jobs. And for quite a long time, I only thought you looked on sort of museum websites or the auction house websites, when in fact there are like arts recruiters that you can contact. And there's a wealth of pages within the art industry that show you where the latest sort of art positions are, be that, you know, museum positions, archive positions, illustration, graphic design, you know, like the whole sort of, even sort of arts and heritage positions as well. There's places that you can go to have a look at those types of jobs. And it was really, for me, that's what I found the toughest. But also kind of like you had that sort of safety net of university, so you kind of knew what your days looked like.
Yeah.
You know, Monday through Friday, you knew what it looked like. And yeah, and then all of a sudden, like, everything kind of fell away, and I was sort of like, oh gosh, what do I want to do? And yeah, I think that's what I found the toughest, is just trying to figure it out, and also like not be too hard on myself, because I ended up working in a coffee shop for a little while after university because there was just no jobs.
So I'm right now working out, right, obviously understandable with the pandemic, and this is something that even if there wasn't, I kind of, in my plan, I knew I wouldn't get a job straight away. So I'm currently working in a mask making factory, because that's like where the economy is.
So I was the opposite. I didn't let myself think like that. I was just trying to be as positive as possible, because my whole way through university, whenever I told anybody, I don't know if it's a Scottish thing, but whenever I told anybody what I did, everyone was like, well, what a waste of time, you're not going to get a job.
Yeah, but even like when I would say to people, like when I obviously worked for Killstar, and I'd like, because I was like the first employee, I'd really worked my way up. And I was like, you know, kind of not a second in command, but I basically ran the warehouse if the owner wasn't there. And that's pretty much what people would say to me was, you're leaving that to pursue drawing. And I think a lot of people turn their nose up at the art industry, but I don't think they realise how much money the art industry produces. Like, if you literally look around you, everything is because of the creative industry. Your packaging, you know, the buildings that you walk in is architecture, your cars are designed by product designers. It's literally everything connects to the arts. And then, you know, during this pandemic, everyone has just consumed Netflix. Who does that? Directors, video makers, costume makers, design. Like, everything just relates to art. Everything relates to art, and there's just still this, people don't understand the actual benefit of what the creative industries has on the economy.
Well, that's it. And even people that love video games, like that's
right. I'm queen video games. I didn't even think of that. Exactly. That's animation. Like, it's absolutely insane. It's
incredible. And I think that's something that I don't think in our lifetime it will ever be valued in the same way. I think, though, people kind of fear what they don't really understand, because really in the movies, for example, what are the jobs you always see? You always see doctors, you always see lawyers, you always see, you know, supermarket employees or managers or office managers. You don't see, well, you do in a handful of movies.
But I think they also present artists as quite either like struggling, poor, you know, they have to, like, they're really low down, like, you know, the struggling artist is like what art is presented as.
The very sort of bohemian idea of it, yeah.
And even like one thing I'll always tip my hat off is college. My lecturer, Amy Whiten, so she is an illustrator, mural designer, really big in Glasgow. She runs a company called Recoat, and she ran a kind of like a business week. Recoat, yeah, they're amazing. It's a mural company, honestly. Everyone, please check them out. Amy Whiten is an absolute angel and deserves all the joy in the world, because She just wanted us to know that we are valid and that whatever we do, we will make it. And they'd brought in like big illustrators, and I feel bad I can't remember their name, but she basically said that, you know, there's some companies that, so you know how big companies have a budget and they'll basically they need to use it by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time they just throw it at creatives,
and
then they don't use the work, so they'll just go, we need to use this money, here, make this. So she'd done like something for British Airways and they never used it, but she was like, I got paid, I don't care. That paid off my mortgage.
Yeah, it's true. It's so interesting because that's how, so I work in a sculpture gallery sort of during the day, and we've had quite a few commissions where, for just like what you said, companies have
just budget they need to use,
have a
and
budget, because otherwise if they don't use the budget,
they won't get it next year.
It's then deducted from their budget the following year. So they use it to on an artist, or they'll pay someone to sort of venture into rebranding them, for example, with no intention of
rebranding.
Yeah.
So it's literally like they have the money to throw at the industry. So I think just that kind of segment is just to show that there is hope within the creative industry. And even then, I think it's one of the industries that still thrived during this pandemic. It's still been able to go on. You know, like people are able to work from home and stuff like that.
Mm.
And, you know, people are still producing film and producing things. It's different, but, you know.
Well, that's it. So a lot of my artists that I work with actually have said that the pandemic hasn't really affected them because it's quite a solitary thing anyway. Like they go to the studio and they work and they do what they do every day, very much sort of removed from an office environment. So for a lot of them, it's
nothing's changed.
Apart from the fact that they've not been able to physically go into exhibitions.
Yeah.
But yeah, so another question, so the penultimate question, is there something you wish you knew before going into your course or your career?
I think mine's was that it's okay to be comfortable with your artistic style. I remember, as I said, I was quite cartoony when I was younger, the way I drew.
Yeah, I remember.
And then when I did fine art in college and also high school, they very much were like realism. So I pursued that. And then when I went to college again, when I was much older, I was terrified to go back to the cartoony. So I went to realism, and I never was fully confident with my work. I could never properly present it. I would make stuff and people would like it, but I didn't. And then it wasn't until third year I did an activity book project and I got selected to be part of it. And it was a really cute bear. I'd drawn just really cute stuff and everyone was praising it. And I was so shocked that the thing that I actually loved doing would receive praise. And then when I started to kind of hone in on it more, I just was happier with my work. I could produce stuff quicker. And I think that's it. Like, especially I understand for young artists trying to find your style, and you'll hear this all the time getting thrown about, but you know, it will come, and when it does, just be really happy with it. I wish I'd just listen to myself and say realism doesn't need to be the only thing that needs to be. You know, your style is valid, and I'm working on it now, and I'm still working on it, and it's nice just being comfortable with the way I work. And what about you? What are something that you wish that you'd known going into your course?
I'm not too sure if there's anything I knew about my... Well, actually, yes. So when I went to university, I was the only one of my friendship group that went to Glasgow University. All my other friends went to different unis. And I actually found it quite difficult to meet and make friends because you're moving around quite a lot at university and it was just a really weird time, and I actually almost dropped out. So I hated university for the first 3 months.
Of Glasgow?
At Glasgow. And I came in one night and I said to my mum, I don't think university's for me, because I was really on my own.
Yeah.
And I had gone from being in a school where everybody knew me. I'm not by any means say that I was really, really popular.
No, she was popular.
No, but But I knew, well, I was popular in the respect that I got on with everybody and my teachers liked me, and I was in every club under the sun at high school. I was in all the school shows, loved it. And then I went to university, and for the first time ever, I was just a number and nobody knew my name, and I really, really struggled with that. Yeah. And that's actually all part of the process, and it actually helped me later on in life when I left university, and I actually ended up taking like a 2-year gap year and it let me have the courage to know that I'm actually okay to sort of spend long periods of time on my own.
Yeah.
And that let me sort of move country, but then it also gave me the skills where I kind of had to speak to people and I had to make friends. And then I've now moved country a few times. I'm now based in London, and it's skills that I learned within that time at university of being like, oh my gosh, I'm on my own and nobody wants to talk to me, to then having a kind of word with myself and being like, oh, actually, no, you need to sort of put yourself out there.
Yeah.
So I kind of wish someone had prepared me for that a wee bit. Like, you might feel a bit lonely, and that's perfectly normal, because I definitely don't think I was the only person.
No, I think a lot, especially because I even remember I was a direct entry. So the way that DGCAD works is they have a foundation year.
Mm-hmm.
So that year is essentially the first year where you do everything to figure out where you want to end up. So as a direct entry, all these people knew each other. But I guess I had a different experience in high school. I was very much a loner. And that's probably why I very much fell into art. So I was very used to being on my own. I was always okay with my own company, and very much was like, okay, just focus on what I need to do. So what ended up happening with us was the direct entries all kind of grouped together, survival mentality. And they, I genuinely think from my uni class, I've made my friends to life. Look quick, but high school isn't everything. If you're very young and listening to this, your high school years aren't your defining years.
Yeah, no,
it's
absolutely.
Literally just the kind of start or origin story. So if you're having a bad time in uni, no, not uni. If you're having a bad time in high school, it will pass. You'll get better. It will be better. It's just a brick in the road, and that's it.
Yeah, no, totally, and really well said. And also at university as well. Like, I really do think you find your tribe, and you find good people.
Mm-hmm.
But it is quite,
because it's like-minded people. That's it. You're literally put with people who think like you want the same goals.
And also, it's not just you. Then also you get to an age where you start getting part-time jobs and going to pubs and taking up classes and stuff like that, and then you meet people that way as well. So I think that's quite important. And again, that's how you grow in things that other people expose you to, other sort of artists and their interests and music and things that they like as well, and it all kind of leads to shaping you. Before we get very sort of philosophical, the final question.
Yeah.
What is a future goal?
For me, I would love to become an editorial illustrator.
What's that?
So an editorial illustrator is, you work with news. So you would read an article, you'd illustrate for the article. I had a little bit of experience with it in my last year. I was the lead illustrator for the university magazine for the year. So I have like a massive portfolio which I'm currently uploading. I don't know why, I just didn't feel like showing anyone, but it's what I want to do. Like, you have to put yourself out there to get what you want, and you have to present yourself the way that you want to be perceived. I love working fast paced. Like, I love just being given a brief and told go. I just kind of work that way because that's kind of where my weirder ideas come from, and then they tend to work. So I would love to be like, work with magazines and newspapers, and it's like fast paced turnaround. So you've only got like 24 hours to do your project. And obviously Nico Paws to become a bigger thing, but I would love to freelance and maybe a kids book. That would be fun.
Yeah, that would be good.
I would really like to do a kids book. What about you, Jo? What's your future goals?
I would really love to, I think, do this though. I love talking about art, and I love meeting people that have varied interests. And I think what I've loved about this podcast is that I've met people and continuing to meet really interesting people who have such a varied interest and wide knowledge base of all these different amazing things, and also just keep championing how fun art history is. Because one of the things that inspired me to sort of kick all this off is my whole way through university, both undergrad and masters, and in my career, like I said, I'm based in London, there's this really elitist nature that surrounds art history, and I'm from a very working class background.
Well, this is why I didn't like fine art, was because of that elitism. And it really put me off.
And I just think actually it's for everybody, as I say all the time. Art is for everybody, and I think if people sort of want to hear me talk, I would love to have, I think like the sort of pie in the sky goal is presenter. I would love to sort of write a TV program and present on something.
Yeah.
And I would love to write a little bit more as well. Like I definitely think there's a book in me somewhere, sort of deep down in there. But yeah, we'll see. So that's just some of my goals and what I want to do. But thank you so much for coming on and sort of sharing your story. And it's interesting because there's things in there that we're very close as sisters.
Yeah, we actually didn't know about each other.
What? No, you're saying that as if we didn't know we existed.
No, who are you?
Get out of my house.
It's just interesting that I didn't know that you wanted to leave uni. Like, I just always saw you as like, you and Lisa are so smart in my eyes. And even, like, I remember me and you had this discussion and you were, like, dead stressed about uni. And you were just, like, so stressed. And I was like, Joe, why are you stressed? You're doing it to yourself. And you went, Nicole, you don't go to uni. You don't understand. You weren't being nasty, but at the time it cut me deep. And I
remember you telling me that.
Oh my God. And I was like, oh, I feel so stupid that I never went to uni. And then I just started thinking about it. And I think that was maybe the tiny catalyst that got me wanting to kind of pursue an education. But you were not being nasty. You were like legit. Because even now, I'm like, now I understand the stress of uni.
Yeah.
Oh my God. The tears that have been shed because of illustration in that course. But it's just a completely different level.
It's part of the process though, and I think everybody has that no matter what you study. I'm pretty sure there's mathematicians listening to this being like, yep, I get there. Try to crack that equation. Yeah.
People who are not in the creative industry and listening to this because, you know, that's the whole point, you know, Joe wants to champion this. The arts is hard, especially for creating, because you're literally needing to empty your brain every single day.
Well, that's it, and it's terrifying when you have a burnout. So I had a bit of a burnout end of November 2020, and I was genuinely terrified the whole way through. Like, actually, it was the start of November, actually. So the whole way through November and December, I was like, I had no ideas of what I wanted to write about, to post about, and I'd already signed up to all these things that I said, all these newspaper articles and things that I said I would write and submit, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And then it eventually ended up a couple of late nights of me like in, you know, our office trying to be like, oh God, what's happening?
Well, even remember when you came and stayed with me in Dundee, and it was like I was writing my dissertation. If I sneezed, I would cry. Yeah. And I was so burned out, and you were just, and like, I remember at one point you just, even though you'd say hello, I'd just be like, please, chill. Like, yeah, it's absolutely, it's fun. Also, burnout is a thing, but, you know, don't feel like you need to create if you don't feel like creating it. Yeah. And don't compare yourself to people on social media. I know you didn't ask for advice, but I'm just going to throw it out to everyone. Yeah. Because
But I think it's so different. It's interesting because everybody's story to where they got
to where they were,
to where they are now, and where they want to go is really interesting. And I hope people that are listening to this that perhaps can very much relate to the processes that perhaps Nicole and I have gone through, but of course, I think it applies to any industry. Yeah. And if you've enjoyed this episode, then please do let us know, and feel free to sort of share your experiences as well. It'd be really interesting.
Yeah, and Q's and A's as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got questions, even if I can, you know, me and Joe are happy to answer.
Yeah, of course. If anybody has any questions about, you know, where to look for jobs, or where to even look for university courses, or where to, I don't know, buy materials, or things to see, people to check out on Instagram, I don't know, just whatever really. If you've got any questions about making your way in the art world, then or the creative world, let us know.
Yeah, we're always here for a gap.
Thank you so much for coming back on again.
No problem. I love hanging out with you.
Aw, thanks. I've paid her to say that.
Thank you.
Right.
It was that.
Right. Bye.
Bye.
And there you have it, the end of another episode of the Joe's Art History podcast. Once again, thank you so much to Nicole for coming on and just talking to me about her journey into the art world, or the creative industry rather. Nicole felt like the right person to have on because obviously, of course, as we said previously, we're both sisters. She's been on the podcast quite a few times now, and we both came into the creative industry and the art world in two very different polar opposite directions. And really, it just kind of shows you there is no one straight line into any route. or into any business or career path. And I would really encourage you, if you've enjoyed this and you've thought of someone that's perhaps at university or has just left university or is perhaps thinking about leaving school to go to university or college, do pass it on to them. I always feel that, myself anyway, I would have found something like this quite comforting to know that there's people out there that are willing to talk about sort of the ups and downs and how they came to something. It's just always interesting to know. If you would like Nicole and I to do a Q&A session of tips and tricks or things that we found or how we've overcome certain things such as imposter syndrome or comparison, let us know and we'll have a talk about that, because these things exist in the creative industries and the art world as well. And yeah, they're very important topics to cover. And although, okay, granted, not art historical, they are important issues that serve both industries. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please make sure to like, rate and subscribe. And if you're able to, on whatever device you're listening to, please do leave the podcast a review. If you're listening on iTunes especially, I would be very much appreciated if you could ping me a little review and maybe add a couple of stars in there. 5? What? Anyway, as always, I've been your host, Jo McLaughlin, your resident art historian. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can. joesarthistory@gmail.com is my email address, which is in the show notes below. Or you can DM me on Instagram @joesarthistory. And while you're there, if you want to give me a wee follow on Instagram, that would be lovely as well, as I write constantly about different forms of art history, not just what's on the podcast. So if you're wanting to get some more art history fun facts, that's the place to go. You can also watch this podcast on YouTube, which is available in the show notes below. Finally, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to welcoming you next time on the Jo's Art History podcast. Until then, keep learning and remember, art is for all. Bye guys.